So we have to optimize first, and that means looking at how you do the things you do now. What does the process look like? I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation where it's like, why do you use this accounting system? My favorite is ask somebody why they use Infusionsoft or why they use Salesforce. 99% of the time they're like, well, I went to a trade show and like that's what everyone uses, and I hate it. It's Infusionsoft and Salesforce. It's like the two most amazing scams, I think, in some ways, right? Because so many people use those tools, hate them, and don't use them for their full potential.
Welcome to the podcast. Nathan Newberry here, your host. I have Ari Maizel here. Super pumped to have you hear about his story and his origin story and the things he's doing with all of his students. But before we do that, I want to give you guys a free gift. Most leaders need to know how to grow an audience online, and they're just stuck at not sure how to do it and build a brand. So if you need help with building systems, you're needing to know how to generate leads or do some sales, I got all that down below in a free training for you to really be able to access to connect with you. Ari, I'm super pumped, though, that you're here and we could dive in here. What is high performance? I want to kind of get your take on what that looks like in your years of experience to your success, the focus that you've had to have, and also all the students that you've helped. You've really kind of had to climb this with understanding what type of person that is. What does that mean to you?
So I think for the most part, high performance is being able to do all the things that you want to do, right? Without compromise. And that's not always attainable. And a lot of times it's not really an end journey in and of itself, or sorry, it's not an end point. Rather, it's a journey along the way that you never sort of get to the end of. But that's the main one. And then sort of what is required of your life to be able to do that? What do you have to do in terms of structure, systems, in terms of discipline? And then overall, I'm a really big believer in the Japanese philosophy of Kaizen, the continual change for the good. So I'm not a big goal setter. I'm not big on setting big goals for me or for my clients that I work with. I feel like if I am better today in any way than I was yesterday, then that is success for me, and that's performance. Now, I have a lot going on in my life. I have 5 children. I have multiple different organizations that I'm involved in, volunteering, running my business, and working with coaching clients around the world. And I feel like I'm still able to say yes to all the things that I want to say yes to.
Yeah. You're well known in this space as being like, you're a father, you're a husband, you do woodworking on the side, you're a volunteer EMP person, you're like running for like on the board of Princeton, you have your own coaching business, like you got a lot going on, man. Like how do you deal with all of that? Like tell us a little bit about your success of like how you help people now and how you've really been able to get there.
Yeah, so just for further context there, right? So I'm an EMT, volunteer EMT, and the vice president of our local rescue squad here in Princeton. I did get elected to the Princeton School Board, so I'm on that
Amazing.
now. I'm also the vice chair of the Princeton Municipal Committee on Affordable Housing, Racial, Economic, and Social Equity and Human Services, which is a pretty tall order. And I'm also on the board of our local Jewish center. So involved in a lot of things. Yeah. And for me, service is love. I live to serve in many ways, and it really fulfills me in all these various ways. It requires a lot of balance and a lot of systems and things. And what ultimately it means is that I have systems in place that can do all the things that I don't need to be doing myself. That's one. And then the other one that's really big is that the vast majority of the work and the things that I do are done asynchronously, which is that to me, if there was a single silver bullet in terms of productivity and efficiency, it would be asynchronous communication, right? So the opposite of what we're doing right now, right? So synchronous being, I say something, you you shrug, you nod, you respond, and I go back and forth with you, and it's live, which has its place. But it's overused in a lot of situations. And, when people talk about meetings suck and all that stuff, that's synchronous communication being used incorrectly. And there is so much that we can do asynchronously now that requires some level of culture shift, but it's way more effective because when we do things asynchronously, what we're basically doing is we're communicating when we're at our best and most able. The other person is receiving it when they're at their best and most able, and then they are responding in kind. So 100% of my coaching business is done asynchronously. I don't have any synchronous meetings with any of my clients. I have clients all around the world, and everything is done over. We use Voxer. Some people are familiar. I love Voxer
Yeah.
for voice communication, but it is 100% asynchronous. So I have clients I speak to every single day for a minute or two at a time, but it's all, again, asynchronous on my time. And that means that I take my kids to school every morning. I pick them up every afternoon. I never miss a soccer game, and I can take advantage of all these other committees and things that I need to be involved in.
Yeah. I love that. How did you gain that wisdom and understanding? Like, where did it all begin? Like, take us back to the very beginning of this. Was your parents really successful in driving you that way, or were you just wired a little bit different and you knew that?
Uh, a number of different factors, I'd say. I mean, so my parents are both entrepreneurs. My father's an art dealer and has been for a long time, and also a real estate developer. And my mother was an artist, a painter, and then a real estate broker for a long time. And now her 14th career, she's a baker and loves it more than anything. But she's a baker at a restaurant that she owns. So, yeah.
Love it.
Excuse me. Um, when I was 12, I started my first company, which was a website design company. And that sounds like, oh yeah, like a lemonade stand, but no, it really was like, I feel like when I was 12 was 1994. And at that point, there were like a couple really big companies building websites, and then there was just like a bunch of kids who knew HTML essentially.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing like a couple hundred websites for different businesses over the years. Started a second and then a third company before I got out of high school. And after high school, I went to college for a little bit. And when I graduated from college, I went into real estate development and construction. And I think I've always had a different way of seeing things, and not that like some superpower or some super intelligence. I just kind of like see things differently than people often do and attack them in that way. So uh, some combination thereof. And then what really happened that sort of led to the genesis of where I am now is that when I was 23, I had just finished this big project, this real estate development project that I had started. I was in an enormous amount of debt having done this project, and I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease.
Mm.
And Crohn's is an inflammatory condition that affects the digestive tract. It's considered to be incurable. And the short-term result was I went from working 18 hours a day to working an hour a day because I was just so limited in my ability to get things done and have energy and not be sick or in the hospital. And I overcame the illness within 2 years or so, off meds, no, out of this is an incurable illness.
Mm.
And I've been free of it for almost a decade and a half now, and I've helped lots of other people get there too.
Wow.
Because I saw things differently. I got into biohacking, and I started speaking about this, and I ended up doing a TEDx talk on it. And the hour a day was the really interesting thing for me, and that was the restriction that led to the productivity space that I'm in now. Because if you ask somebody that works a 9 to 5, you say, what would you do if you had to leave the office by 4? Most people, and I've asked this question a lot, most people are like, well, I just skip lunch. Right? It's like, that's easy. But then you say to that person, well, what if you only had 1 hour a day to get things done? What would you do? And then it's a real stumper because that requires a completely different way of thinking that, quite frankly, did not exist at the time. There was no productivity system in my experience that existed to answer that question. There's plenty of things like, how do you get more out of your day? How do you get more out of your morning and this? But there's never like, you have an hour. How are you going to get everything done?
Yeah.
And the answer is you can't, right? So if you can't get everything done in an hour, but these things have to get done, then who or what is going to do them for you? And so that restriction, not only did that breed the entire system that is my productivity system, which is less doing and ultimately the replaceable founder, but it became a core tenet of the whole method, which is that these restrictions are what truly create the innovations. And to this day, I'm constantly looking at ways that I can work within restrictions, because when people say, I don't have enough time, and I hear that again all the time in my line of work, most of the time, and I'll push back on this, most of the time, they actually have too much time and they're just not using them correctly. Parkinson's law tells us that work expands to fill the time allotted to complete it, and that is so true.
Yeah.
You give somebody an hour to do something, they'll do it. If you give them a half an hour to do it, they'll probably still get it done, depending on what it is. So those restrictions are really fascinating to me. And the truth is that you and I, right now on this podcast, right, you can presume that the two of us are in pretty good position compared to the majority of the world, right? Because we have podcast equipment and we have the ability to sit here, on a Tuesday and have this conversation. Those that that lack of restriction, which is what this is, ultimately, I think I don't want to say it's made people soft, but we like forget how to innovate in a lot of ways because we just don't have to.
Yeah.
You can say you have to, but you don't have to.
That's so interesting. Like I think people like understand that in theory, but they do not practice this at all. They're like, hey, I got more time, I got to work. And they just fill it. Right. And then so even if they get their stuff done, they still feel that way. Or I want to even ask you this question too, because you're a father of young kids. And we always want more precious time. And I find this being guilty myself. And I want to get your take on this is that I feel guilty when I am doing anything but work. Right. And I think there's that element of an high achiever that we're just obsessed with our work and our craft or creating. And so it's fun to do in some that way to achieve. But then there's the downtime, there's the downshift that we need to practice and hone in. How do you do that? And how did, like, it sounded like you had to figure this out because you had a disease and you're like, I got to figure it out. And the biohacking and the stuff that you cured yourself with, and now you teach it. It's fascinating. How do you go about that? How do you be able to craft an ideal life that's really going to be healthy and long-term and also really rewarding?
So there's this really interesting principle from the 1800s, actually, from the I guess the second industrial revolution, the first one, I'm not sure, long time ago, called Jevons paradox. Jevon. It's fascinating. Basically, this was about coal, and what was happening at the time was that coal plants and engines and coal-fired plants, whatever, were becoming extremely efficient, much, much more efficient. And the theory, right, is, well, as it becomes more efficient, using less and less coal to get more and more energy out of it, well, we're going to need less coal. So coal is going to be a poor investment. People aren't going to want coal. The coal market's going to crash. And what Jevons paradox shows is that it's actually quite the opposite. As technological advances increase efficiency, the demand for the things that fuel those and that like become more and more in demand. Because why would we have, why are we going to use less coal? Now we're just going to have 45,000 more coal plants that operate more efficiently. And where this is more relevant, like today, is with AI. And I don't know if you saw the recent news about DeepSeek in China. Right. So they basically have trained an AI model that is supposedly comparable to OpenAI's model that they spent, I don't know, $60 billion or something to train. This Chinese company, DeepSeek, did it with like $6.5 million because they had to, because the chips were not available to them because of embargoes and trade issues and all sorts of stuff. So the NVIDIA question is like, well, if people can do it with a tenth of the chips, then they're not going to need NVIDIA. It's like, no, that's crazy, because now what will happen is all these other smaller companies are going to come in and they're going to use those chips and they're going to expand exponentially. So what does that have to do with your question? The more and more efficient and effective, ultimately effective, that I become in my life, the more and more I'm able to do things without burning out, without creating this ridiculous concept of work-life balance, which is not a thing in my opinion. It's work-life integration. Everything we do is part of like everything we do. So it's not like, oh, great, I can get my work done an hour a day, so now I don't have to do anything, and now I can just sit around and like be with my kids and stuff. That's not realistic. I'm going to use that time to do other things, and I'm not just staying busy. Like I keep on doing more and more things to have more and more impact. So it's like sort of unendingly fulfilling in that way. And then how that translates to my family is that I believe that it is very important for parents to have something outside the house, outside the home, that is fulfilling. Kids are very fulfilling. Kids are very challenging, but kids need to see that. I don't think it's healthy for kids to feel like or see that they are the only thing that can create fulfillment for their parents and that everything they do is about them, because what happens if they misbehave then? Does that mean that like their worth is compromised at that point? Like so
Mm.
uh it's too easy to just become complacent and be like, well, I got this done, I'm doing it really efficient. Like, now what? Now I'll just live life. What does that mean? Right? Like I feel like it's our duty to improve ourselves, to do better, to do more, and to help our greater community.
Yeah. So to be a
Hmm.
founder that can escape the daunting work of doing more, I feel like there's three things. There's the mindset shift to actually be okay with making that possible. Then there's the systems you got to build, and then the people you got to hire to really be empowered to do what they need to do. Like, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah. So the original framework for my methodology, the less doing framework, was OAO, right? So optimize, automate, outsource. And that order is extremely important because what happens far too often is that people outsource first, right? So they come across a problem, they're overwhelmed, they're too busy to this. I got to hire somebody, I got to hire people. And the problem is that
Mm.
hiring somebody into chaos is not good for you and it's not good for them. And ultimately, that's not a long-term strategy. And one of the things I always love doing this is whenever before COVID, when I used to speak on stages a lot more, you ask people, how many of you ever outsourced something in your life? Right? And you get a number of people in the room raising their hands, a lot of people usually. And then I'd say, all right, now how many of you have ever had a bad
Mm.
experience outsourcing something? And like invariably, more people would raise their hands than had raised their hands to the first question. So I'm like, okay, great. So more people have had a bad experience outsourcing than have ever outsourced before. Perfect. And it's like, well, the good news is it's your fault most of the time, and that always usually got a chuckle or two. But it's true because what happens is people are like, oh, I don't want to do data entry. Like this thing, I'm going to hire somebody to do it, and then they don't explain it properly. The person on their end is less trained and has less context, and even if they're completely competent, they're sort of set up for failure. And then at the same time, when we outsource things, we subconsciously
Mm.
people are expecting to get a better result than they would have gotten themselves. Right? So think about that. It's like this person knows less, has less information. I'm not going to give it to them. Like I'm not going to explain it particularly well because a lot of people just don't actually know how to delegate, even if they think they do. And then I'm expecting that person to do a better job than I did. So there's no way they can succeed. So we have to optimize first, and that means looking at how you do the things you do now. What does the process look like? I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation where it's like, why do you use this accounting system? My my favorite is ask somebody why they use Infusionsoft or why they use Salesforce.
Yeah.
99% of the time they're like, I went to a trade show and like that's what everyone uses and I hate it. You know, it's Infusionsoft and Salesforce. It's like the two uh, most amazing scams, I think, in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Because so many people use those tools, hate them, and don't use them for their full potential. Unless you're Walmart or McDonald's or something, there's very few use cases, in my opinion, and I'm sure people will get very upset about that, but very few use cases where Salesforce or Infusionsoft makes sense. But they've always been this sort of behemoth thing, and it's the same thing as outsourcing, right? It's like, oh, I'm just going to sign up for this CRM that I heard Tony Robbins talk about, and everything's going to be fine. Never works. So we have to optimize first. Look at how you do what you do now. So many
Yeah.
companies with that do sales don't have a sales process. You did sales, right?
Right.
Like some
They
people,
wing
a
it.
lot of companies just
Yeah.
don't have a sales process, right? You just kind of figure it out, you do it, right? Exactly. So your process has to be so well defined that it becomes so obvious to outsource it, or better yet, especially now, to automate it. So it's automating is the second step, right? So if we can automate something in that process that a you previously might have had a person do, if you don't do that and you give that to a person,
Hmm.
you are in essence dehumanizing them, right? Because you're giving them work that a computer could do. The best thing about outsourcing, I mean, about automation is, yeah, it works all the time, never sleeps, never gets sick, never quits. That's great. The best part to
Yeah.
me about automation is it doesn't create errors. So avoiding errors to me is huge from a mental standpoint, right? Because especially entrepreneurs, especially founders, they're the ones that are staying up at night in the middle of the night being like, did did we send the gift basket to the new client with the thing, and then did we follow up with
Yeah.
that one? Did I am I supposed to get back to that? Like those are the things that keep people up at night. And when we use automations, that doesn't become an issue anymore. Then, if anything is left over at that point, we've optimized first, we've automated. That's when you start to look at outsourcing to some sort of a specialist or generalist, and not before that, because at that point they can actually add value to it. They might even be able to engage in the work and take it further than you would otherwise. So, again,
Yeah.
I'm always trying to avoid bringing people into it because people bring errors. And in doing so, I still outsourced, thousands and thousands and thousands of things. I owned a virtual assistant company for a long time. So it's that framework is what's really important. We need to look at, and it's harder to do that. It's harder to stop and be like, um, you know, rather than just bringing somebody in to fix this, like
Right.
let me see if it actually needs to be fixed at all, or if we even need to do this process anymore to begin with. And I'll give you, if I can, I'll give you a really concrete example that I like to give when I give talks is paying a bill. Right? So average number of steps to pay a bill is about 23 for a person, not a company. Right? So that's like they get the bill, they have to go to their online banking software, maybe they have to add in the pay, then they have to schedule it, transfer the money, whatever. It's like 23 steps if you were to like actually write them all out. But the problem is if, you know, I hire you, Nathan, and I'm like, I need you to pay bills for me. And I'm just like, yeah, you just go to the banking website and just,
Yeah.
just pay them
Mm.
out of that account. I'm telling you 3 steps basically, but they're really 23. Right? So when we optimize, we're actually looking at that process. We're looking at the steps, and everything we do is a process, from how you pay bills to hire and firing to how you make your lunch. Everything is a process. And if we don't look at it, and which most of us don't because it takes too much time and effort, and our brains don't like to do that. But if we look at it, then we can see like, oh, step 3 and 4 are redundant. I don't need to do that, right? So I can take those out. And step 6, oh, we haven't done that in months. Like, why is that in
Mm.
there? And so you take those 23 steps, and now you're down to 14 without doing anything else. You've just optimized the process. Now you say, okay, step 6 and 7, actually, there's a tool that can automate that now that didn't exist 6 months ago. Cool, automated, done. And step 10, where I move the file from Dropbox over to Google Drive and email it to my account, Zapier can do that now. So I take 3 steps out there. And now we're down to like 6 steps where you can now hire
Yeah.
a virtual assistant with very little training, and they can
Okay.
follow the 6 steps
Now,
and
how
you're
do
done.
people find time to do that? Right. And how time do they focus on? I think people, like we were talking about, they just shoot from the hip. They don't have that clarity. They're like, I know I need to do it, but if I sit down and try to optimize it, then I'm going to be wasting more time than actually making more time. And I think what's the reversal on that that's more productive and the right mindset that you should have with that?
So it's a transferable skill. So it's sort of like a logical fallacy if you look at it and say like, well, I'm going to spend 20 minutes on this one task to save 20 seconds. And I've been there, I've done that. But very few like there's a lot of times where people are like, oh, this is a one-off task or one-off project. I'm never going to do this again. I've never done this before. It's like it's just not true. Like there's very few truly unique tasks in any business unless you're running like you're just like, well, I'll do whatever somebody wants me to do today. Then that's not really a business. So it's a muscle that we have to, and it's a mindset shift, as you said before, that you need to practice. And so 20 minutes on a task that saves you in that particular task 15 seconds, sure, on the face of it that doesn't look great, but the next time you come across a task,
Mm-hmm.
now maybe you're going to be able to spend the 20 minutes on a task that takes 2 hours out of your time. And I would also argue that the 20-second tasks, the ones that you're doing dozens or probably hundreds of times a day, you're making mistakes, and those mistakes can add up. And those mistakes can add up to
Yeah.
actual dollar cost, time cost, or just
And I
mental
think the goal that
space
everybody's
that you
wanting
just
to
don't have.
achieve with working is to achieve that freedom, right? So if we're talking about outcomes, it's like that's what they're trying to achieve. But if you're doing it and doing micro
Mm-hmm.
tasks that don't matter, then you're not achieving that freedom that you're ultimately wanting to look at. So it's worth the investment of the extra little time to put the systems right in place. And then let me ask you this question here too is I think the big variable is how to hire, right? Even if I'm looking at oversee, talent, that's like a VA or an EA that can help streamline your time in your life and systemize things. Like, how do you find that talent? Like, what's the best approach to even find local talent or abroad talent? Like, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So I'll answer that. I just want
Mm-hmm.
to touch on one thing you said there about freedom. Right? Freedom has different meanings to different people. There's something actually called the liberty paradox. So there's freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from is a very negative paradox. It's still freedom, but it's a negative liberty, meaning like we're trying to free ourselves from something, like from the grind, from debt, from
Mm.
the bad boss. And then there's freedom to, which is the positive liberty, right? So the freedom to do something. And I think that that gets conflated far too often with people, right? So for me, freedom is the ability to leave the business if you so choose, and the business continues to operate and grow in your absence. Which means I don't
Mm.
want people to, I don't want everyone to just like leave their businesses, but I do want them to be able to.
Yeah.
Because if you can't, you don't really run a business. You own your own job at that point. And if I can leave the business, if I can go out and I can be an EMT and I can be on a municipal committee on, affordable housing, racial, economic, social equity, and I can be on the school board, the things that I learn in those settings that I'm then able to bring back into my business and multiply that impact are
Yeah.
immeasurable. But I couldn't do that if I couldn't leave the business. So hiring, I have hired personally. I've hired well over 1,000 people in my career, and in a couple different businesses, I've created automated hiring processes that are so effective that they have like less than 2% turnover. In the current in the rescue squad where I'm the vice president, I created an automated recruiting and hiring process. And when I joined the squad 4 years ago, it took 8 months between my application to me walking in the door, and I already had 14 years of experience, or 10 at that point. Now it's as little as 3 weeks, and it's almost entirely automated, and we're getting such a better stream of candidates coming in because of it.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't quite answer your question, but it's an important part of it. So the point is that I've learned quite a few things about how you identify true talent, and one of the things is that if it's creative or sort of somebody has to do something, like they have to write or they have to create graphics or even legal work, things like that. I'm always more interested in seeing how somebody fixes bad things than how they have done really well on good things. Meaning, if I'm going to hire a copywriter, I don't want them to give me samples of their copywriting work because, first of all, they could have gone through 7 iterations. They could have had their mentor,
Mm.
Perry Belcher, look at it, one of the best copywriters ever, and before they give it to me. I want to give that person a shitty piece of copy and say, make this better, right? A programmer, I want to say, like, here's a website and this button doesn't work, right? This form doesn't work. How fast can you fix it? So I'm always more interested in seeing how people fix bad things and how they do with problems rather than how they've done really well before. That's one thing. The other thing is that interview questions. I have simplified my interview process down to 4 questions. It is the 4 questions I ask in almost any position I hire for, and I've used these for virtual assistants. I've used this for CEOs. First 2 questions are really easy, right? Why you and why us, right? So why should we hire you, and why do you want to work with us? The third question is, tell me about a time you screwed up at work and how you handled it. The fourth question is, if I don't hire you, why do you think that will be? Fascinating question, right? Because what that does is that it makes
Yeah.
somebody, sort of forces them to be very introspective about how they showed up in the
Yeah.
interview. Requires a little bit of self-awareness that a lot of people just don't have. And it's for somebody to be like, well, the really bad answer is, well, there's probably so many great candidates and maybe I just didn't stand out. It's like, you got that right. The a really good answer is something like, for me, what I would say is, I probably come across as something of a lone wolf, right? Somebody who likes to do their own thing, work their own way. I'm sure that's how I appear, but I've been leaders of teams. I have been the lowest rung in teams before, and I find value in every different position in a team. But again, I know that
Mm-hmm.
I give that impression that I like to run things and do it my way, but that's just not the case, right? So a question like that's a great answer for me.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I've been able to prepare that answer a long time ago, but I've seen some really good answers to those kind of. So those 4 questions tell me so much about somebody. And then in terms of finding the talent, I think that Fiverr is the greatest resource, bar none, for finding really, really great talent. I think Upwork and Guru and Odesk and all those are just a total Wild West crapshoot.
Hmm.
And I don't think that any of those platforms actually do a very good job of protecting the consumer. Fiverr is awesome. And what I like about Fiverr, a lot of those people are on the same platforms anyway. I've hired no less than a dozen people full time off of working through with them through Fiverr. And Fiverr just as a platform is great because you have because it's such micro tasks, or there's things as little as $5. You have people that do very, very specific, very small things. Like it's not just like, oh, I want to hire an architect. They'll be the person who's like, I will,
Hmm.
digitally change the faucets on your sink in an image, like something that specific that you can always find. Uh, and what I like to do on Fiverr is I will make a message. So like this is what I need to do, and this is what I'll give, and here's a link to the document, whatever it is. I'll take that message, I'll copy it, and I will immediately send it to no less than five, but sometimes up to 10 people at the same time. So I'll search for a gig, and I'll just contact me, and I'll hit them all.
Hmm.
Invariably, before I've gotten the 10th one, two people have already responded to me, right? And then there's going to be two or three that take a little bit longer. There's going to be two or three that don't ever respond, right? And so the ones that do respond, we start going back and forth right away. I can see how well their language proficiency is. I can see what their pricing is, and then when someone gives me a price, now I can immediately use that against the other one. I say against, but I mean it is basically right to then have a sense because when someone says what's your budget, I always find that very
Right.
frustrating because it's like I don't know. You tell me. Like I don't know I don't really have a budget in mind. This could be worth $1,000. It could be worth $10. Like tell me, and then someone will say it, and it's like all right, now I have a ballpark idea. So now I can go to the next person, and within 10 minutes you can identify somebody who you're going to be working with. And in my experience, I found people that way that I then have very, very long-term relationships with. So it's a wonderful platform and really, really good talent on there as well. And the other thing too is that some of those people that aren't responding to you, it's because they're in another time zone. They have a work schedule. Maybe they're in the same time zone as you, but they have a 9 to 5. And it's like, well, but I want to work right now. So I'm going to find somebody,
Right.
that wants to work on
How do
my
you
schedule,
build
and that means that
like
they're available
a
right
full
now.
business doing that with either in person or all remote team? Like, how do you build an infrastructure like that? Is it very efficient? I feel like there has to be, personal assistants or, house managers, or you have to have like an account manager, you have to do sales, marketing. Like, there's other aspect of, things in person or remote. Like, how do you build the infrastructure that way?
So I mean, it's funny, and I think this is going to probably come as a surprise, but so I uh, I had a team of 7 working for me in my last company, in less doing my last sort of iteration of it. I had 7 people. I had a full time like video guy and a social media person, and I had a copywriter and 2 coaches and the salesperson. I had all these different people, and currently I don't even have a virtual assistant. I haven't had a virtual assistant in over a year. And then I went through about 6 months where I was using one or several, and then before that, it was almost 3 years actually without an assistant. We do not have a maid in our house. We don't have a driver. We don't have a chef. We don't have a house manager. Anything that needs to get fixed in this house, I do it. My wife cooks dinner every single night. I drive the kids around to all the different things for the most part. Uh, and I'm able to do that because of asynchronous work, right? So it's not just an automatic, like I need to outsource this because I can, right? There's a lot of times where, I mow my own lawn. Actually, my wife mows the back lawn. I mow the front lawn, right? So like, and it's not because we couldn't afford or have somebody else do it, but it's those are the things that like feel real in a lot of ways, right? So people always talk about to me like, oh, if you automate all this stuff and outsource stuff, you're getting rid of the human element. It's like no, actually, the reason that I can write a handwritten card to a client or call a client up is because all that other stuff is taken care of. It enhances the human element, right? So now, there's certain teams, of course, there's going to be certain companies that require dozens or hundreds or even thousands of employees. That's and that gets into like a whole other sort of conversation when you're working with those kind of businesses. But for the most part, for the smaller ones, like
Hmm.
you don't want to. My opinion is you don't want to have a dedicated anything, meaning like when I use virtual assistant services, I like services like Magic, for example, where you have dozens or hundreds of assistants that can operate on the task at any
Yeah.
time. Because what that does is it forces you to have a really good process. And what that means is that I can plug and play the physical human talent as needed without like dehumanizing them, if anything, because it actually gives them something really clear and interesting to work on. Because if it's something that AI could do, which is happening more and more, it's probably not that interesting or requires the intellect and talent of that person. So I take that opposite approach, which is not that like AI is not replacing
Hmm.
the jobs. If anything, it's sort of like bubbling to the top the people that really do stuff really well and make that difference. Because I can get 60, maybe 65% of the way there with AI writing my newsletters. But Amy, my writer, who's worked with me for years and has ghostwritten several of my books, like just does it better.
Yeah.
And there's certain scenarios where that doesn't matter, but there's some that it does. So, and I think that's really important about thinking about replaceability, because the replaceable founder is my business methodology. Everybody in the business should be as
Mm.
replaceable as possible so that they
I
can
think
be
that's
replaced
such a
up,
unique
not out
approach,
in
Ari,
the
because I think
business.
everybody's in the hunt to try to like eliminate friction. And I love it because I think you've done it. You've eliminated it for years with different businesses, and now
Yeah.
you're coming back to more of the element of like just being more present, being more clear, I think I think we're going to see more of that rejection of the efficiencies to doing what you're doing right now. To the point of what you're doing right now is you're borrowing your kid's laptop because you don't have one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because first of all, I rarely sit down, um, but
Mm.
if I can't do it from my phone, then I need to figure out why, right? And then, by the way, sometimes the solution is, well, I need a person then on the other end that I can forward something to. And 10 years ago when I started, or 14 years ago when I started doing this experiment with the phone, there were definitely things that you couldn't automate. I remember one of the things was we were building a I was still doing real estate at the time. I was building a property, and the architect sent me a CAD file, the architectural um, plans. And at the time, there was no mobile CAD viewing app for the phone, so I had to forward it to a VA to have them turn it into a PDF to send it back to me, so I could read it. Certainly not the most efficient thing, but if my goal is I want to do everything from my phone, and I don't want to say to somebody, "Hey, I have to wait until I get back to my computer in 6 hours to be able to look at that thing." No, because the other thing that I'm a really big believer in is I don't like delaying people who need a decision from me or something. I think there's a butterfly effect that happens there essentially. Like if you have a team working with you and they need you to make a decision on something or move something forward and you are doing something else or you can't deal with it because you can't get to your computer yet, the
Mm.
the delay like multiplies and then suddenly people are missing deadlines 2 weeks later and nobody knows why. So I believe that my job as a leader of an organization is to reduce friction, as you very nicely put it, right? So, and that means serving those that work with me, getting things out of their way,
I
and
love this
helping sort of
conversation, Ari.
set
Like I
that
can have
path.
this for hours, just trying to be efficient and pick your brain with everything. Before we jump off, is there anything else that a founder should know or apply or do to really be the most efficient person as the founder to really kind of have the life they want?
You need to be very intentional about your communications, meaning when, how, and where you do them. So many companies, there's no rhyme or reason how they communicate. So they're sending emails, they're texting, they're using WhatsApp, they're using Slack, they're using Discord, and everything in between. And if you don't get an answer in one place, then they send you a message somewhere else, and then they do this and that. As
Mm.
leaders and as founders, 80% of your problems are going to be around communication. Now, I've already talked about asynchronous. That's a big one, right? A lot of things that you're doing synchronously should be done asynchronously. You should offer those asynchronous meetings. I've done asynchronous daily stand-ups with my teams before. Like try to be respectful of other people's time and understand it doesn't match up with yours. And that is particularly difficult for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, I find that the more and more I do, and this is something people should think about, the more work that I do in this space, the more I find that I'm protecting the entrepreneur's teams from the entrepreneur's mind. So it's something I carry with me all the time, and I try to get my clients to remember all the time, is that when you're feeling like something's an amazing idea, or you're really angry about something, or we entrepreneurs tend to bring a lot of emotions, and they sort of tend to work out a lot of
Hmm.
their psychological issues on their
That's
companies
fascinating
instead of with their
approach and the
therapists.
thought there that you just mentioned. But how are Ari, can people follow you more? How can people connect with you, learn about what you're doing, join your community? How can people connect with you and message you and follow you?
So everything's at lessdoing.com. I'm on most social media platforms as at Ari Maizel. But as I mentioned, I do all of my, like 99% of my communication is done asynchronously. So anybody is welcome to go to voxwithari.com. There's a short YouTube video that explains what asynchronous communication is and what Voxer is, which is what I use, the voice communication app. And then they can reach out. And I really do mean that. Get in touch. Ask me questions. You'll know it's me because it's my voice. It's not a VA. It's not AI. It's me.
Yeah, I'll put that link down below,
And I can
so
do that
you can grab
because
that,
it's
connect with him
asynchronous.
further on social media, and then that place that he was talking about before too. But I appreciate you following and joining us, Ari. Appreciate you guys listening in. Until the next episode, we will have you listen then.
Thanks for having me.